Hi. Before going to video, please subscribe to my channel for more interesting stuff.
Story from r/no sleep. Posted by u/Carl1961. We're trapped in our house. Something isn't here with us. I think we're in hell. Part 2. For part 1, please check the link in description box. I turned back to the TV, unmuted it and began changing channels. All the news channels were the same: CNN, MSNBC, God help me, I even checked Fox News. All the pundits and newscasters had bleeding eyes and were all spouting the same nonsensical and disturbing, vaguely apocalyptic word salad. Trump himself was speaking at a news conference. My fellow Americans, cannibalism is a necessary step we must all partake in as we shuffle orgasmically to the vibrations of the corrupt hearts of a dying tambourine. We are all ants, blind to our own pointless incipience as we crawl through our own laughing waste. I checked the rest of the channels in our satellite package. They were the same, and in some cases, even worse. On Food Network, a popular cooking show host was showing us the best way to marinate what was clearly a human foot and leg severed just below the knee. On Cartoon Network, SpongeBob and Patrick performed harikiri together in gruesomely realistic detail, both of them laughing gleefully as they did so. An episode of Everybody Loves Raymond more resembled a scene from the film Event Horizon than a sitcom. The cast engaged in a literal orgy of sex and mutilation, the audience's canned laughter still playing over the carnage, making it all the more horrific. I flipped over to the Discovery Channel and thought for a moment I was watching a film adaptation of a Lovecraft story with extremely impressive special effects. When I realized I wasn't watching a movie and the unspeakable creatures I beheld were real, I quickly turned the channel, shaking a little. Jeopardy! Still had Alex Trebek in the same familiar set, but instead of podiums, the three contestants were each bound to an X-shaped cross with a long table in front of them laid out with a wide array of primitive torture implements that looked like they belonged in the Spanish Inquisition. They all looked terrified. "I'll take victims of famous serial killers for 200, Alex." A young man bound to the middle cross shouted hysterically. Linda Ann Healy, Brenda Carroll Ball and Laura and Amy were all victims of this famous serial killer, Trebek stated. "Who is John Wayne Gacy?" The young man screamed his answer. "No, I'm sorry, the answer was Ted Bundy. And you wagered your right eye." Trebek nodded to someone off camera and a voluptuous half-naked woman wearing a leather hood walked out on stage and selected a pair of iron tongs with sharp points from the table. She closed in on the terrified young man, raising the tongs. He began to thrash around and scream as they drew closer to his eye. I changed the channel, feeling sick. The movie channels were no better. The Godfather was playing on Showtime. I came in on the scene where Michael Corleone returns home and reunites with Kay Adams after having fled to Sicily. It was still Al Pacino and Diane Keaton, at least, part of her, anyway. Now who's being naive, Kay? Michael says, looking into the dead, glazed eyes of Kay's severed head that he's holding in his hands. Then he undoes the fly on his pants with one hand while holding the severed head in the other and lowers the head's mouth too. Well, I think you get the picture. Groundhog Day was just a close-up of Bill Murray's distorted face with a red filter over it, wailing endlessly in anguish. I won't even describe the obscene atrocities I witnessed in Kindergarten Cop. Finally, I'd had enough. I switched the TV off and threw down the remote. I slumped down onto the couch, shaking, my head in my hands. I felt like I was going to vomit. Kate sat beside me and put her arms around me. I hugged her back. "Nick," she asked me, "what do you think it is?" I looked up, thinking intently, considering various possible scenarios that might explain what was going on. Some kind of dimensional rift? A parallel universe? Maybe even some kind of biowarfare attack or a chemical causing people to lose their minds? Maybe this whole thing was just a mass hallucination we were all experiencing. Nothing I could come up with seemed very plausible. "I don't have a clue, Kate," I confessed to her finally. "This isn't like anything I think anyone's ever experienced before." Kate was silent for a long moment before she suggested a possibility of her own. "What if this is the end of the world, Nick?" I looked at her. "You mean, the end of the world in the biblical sense?" "Yes. Judgment Day." Inwardly, I rolled my eyes. We both were rational, college-educated people and we both were atheists. I found the idea that this was some kind of divine punishment or Armageddon ridiculous, but I could tell she was upset, so I didn't insult her by saying something snarky in response. I just shrugged. "Who knows? What are we going to do?" I thought about that. It was the first time I really stopped to consider the plight we found ourselves in. We were trapped in our house, cut off from the outside with no way to reach help, and it seemed the world around us, if not reality itself, had gone nuts overnight. We're just going to have to wait this thing out. Hope it changes for the better eventually. She wasn't happy with my answer. That's it? That's the best you can come up with? She sounded incredulous, and maybe even a little contemptuous. Hey, I said, raising my voice a little, offended, if you've got a better fucking idea, feel free to share it. She lowered her head. I'm sorry, she said softly. This whole thing has me a little shaken up, I guess. It's all right, I said. Let's go check in on the others. We got up and left the living room, going into the kitchen. Annie was making breakfast for Chris and Adam, who were sitting at the table. All three of them were quiet and looked grim. Okay, I said as we stepped through the doorway. So, listen up, guys, obviously we're all in kind of a bind here, but we're going to get through this, okay? We just have to keep our heads together and stick together, and we'll ride this mess out as a team. My little pep talk didn't seem to cheer anyone up that much, and they remained silent. I continued, so, our first order of business is to take inventory of our supplies. Luckily, Kate and Annie had done the weekly shopping just yesterday. We have plenty of food, and if we're careful we can probably stretch it for at least 2 weeks. What I was really worried about was water. Our water was supplied by the city, and considering that, for all we knew, civilization was breaking down outside, or already had, I wasn't sure how long our utilities would remain in operation. The next important thing is water. We need to fill as many clean containers as we can so we have an emergency supply of drinking water on hand in case we need it. Everyone was already freaked out enough, and I didn't want to panic them further by telling them our water line might shut down any time. Adam, I said, pointing to him, why don't you go upstairs and fill the bathtub and sink with as much water as they'll hold? Yeah, sure, Uncle Nick. He got up and left the kitchen. What are we going to do if the power goes out? Chris asked me after Adam was out of earshot. I pointed to the same drawer I had taken the flashlight from earlier. We have about a dozen emergency candles in this drawer. Chris snorted in disgust at this. Yeah, that's great if the power goes out in a thunderstorm at night and you don't need them the next morning. We don't know how long this thing could go on, and if it's pitch black all the time and the power goes out and stays out, those candles might last us a day, maybe 2. Then what? I looked at him, clenching my jaw a little. It was a good question, even if he did ask it in a dickish way. There had always been some animosity between Chris and me, ever since high school, when I had been accepted into college on a scholarship, and he hadn't and had had to go to work for a trucking company instead. I think he resented me somewhat for my solidly middle-class life and cushy office job and pleasant suburban home when he had to break his back 60 hours a week, first at the loading docks, then as long-haul driver, before finally moving up to dispatch, which actually paid less than what he'd been earning as a driver, which was probably as high as he could hope to go. Then the layoff had happened. He and his wife and stepson had been evicted from the crappy trailer they had been renting. Now he was out of work and didn't know what he was going to do to support his family. Then we'll break down the furniture and burn it in the living room fireplace for a light, I answered him, my voice a little tight. We have flashlights we can use to get around the house, and if we're careful, we can make the batteries last for a couple of weeks. Yeah? Chris retorted, and what if this goes on for months? Or years? Or what if it never? Annie, who had her back to us, slammed the plate she had been scooping a serving of scrambled eggs upon onto the counter hard, shattering it, causing Chris, Kate and me to jump. Will you stop it? She shouted angrily, turning to face us, and I saw tears welling in her eyes. Both of you. Just stop it. She stormed out of the kitchen, shoving past Kate and me, and went down the front hall into the den, which was across from the living room, slamming the door behind her. We could faintly hear her sobbing. A long, awkward moment of silence passed. Chris sighed, and slumped his shoulders, looking ashamed. He looked up at me. Sorry, bro. Guess I was losing my cool. Didn't mean to jump on you like that. No harm done, I replied. Nah, I was being an asshole. I know you're doing your best to help us out. I'll go check on her, Kate said, heading toward the den. Chris shook his head and sighed again. I just wish I knew what the fuck all this. He was interrupted by a sudden blood-curdling scream of horror that came from above us. We shot our heads up to the ceiling, our hearts jumping. The scream had come from the upstairs bathroom. Adam.
Thanks for watching. Please do like, share, comment and subscribe for more videos.